I want to welcome everybody back to the FITSNews studio. We've got a guest who's been on the show before who brought us some interesting context on a key component of the Murdaugh murders crime and corruption saga, going back to the Archers Creek boat crash in February of 2019. Steve Sumner not only shared some insights on that, but sort of painted a broader picture of DUI law, boating under the influence law, and how those impacted that case. Just an incredibly informative discussion. That's up on FITSNews.com if you want to check it out. But there's a bigger component of this case that hasn't been discussed much lately that's still hanging over this case. And Steve, you were kind enough to do some real research on this with some colleagues.
You're welcome.
Yeah, very grateful. But it's the issue of maritime law, of admiralty law, and how this factors into this particular boat crash as well. Now, some of the stuff you prepared just blew my mind. This concept goes all the way back to the Phoenicians?
Well, absolutely. It is a very convoluted and complex specialty of law, Will, but it goes back to the Code of Hammurabi. It goes back to the Phoenician fleets, primarily on the Mediterranean, because at that time, that is the way most all major commerce took place, was putting it on ships and going around the Mediterranean. And so different rules, different traditions developed through that, and they still are blending into our law today in terms of admiralty and maritime. The words admiralty and maritime are interchangeable. Mm-hmm. You know, it doesn't matter which term you use. It goes back to the law of the seas, is another kind of common lay phrase about it. And it's actually addressed specifically in our federal Constitution. Wow. It is, various things regarding admiralty, because again, at that point in time, tremendous amount of shipping. That's the way we got goods from Europe. I mean, it's just over the water. So you would have a lot of crashes, you would have a lot of cargo, and this is the body of law that addresses that. About 40 to 50 years ago, it was expanded to include pleasure craft, which is what we had at Archers Creek. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit about that, but admiralty law could apply if any of the attorneys involved sought to go down that road. So we'll talk
conditions
about it. Yes. Yeah, there are conditions. Basically, obviously, you need to have a vessel. You need to have two other components, Will. One is navigable waters, and I want to talk about that for a second. Yeah. This would not include Lake Murray, Lake Hartwell, a pond. It has to have a connection, Will, to the ocean.
So if I got a pontoon boat drinking a beer on Lake Murray,
no,
that would not be admiralty.
Correct.
Okay.
That is purely state there, Will.
Now, who enforces admiralty maritime law? Is it purely a federal jurisdiction?
Yes, primarily it is. Now, we'll talk a little bit in a minute that if an action is filed in state court and the attorneys for the plaintiff choose to go down the admiralty route, it can happen in state court.
Right.
And again, for our audience, this is a little bit confusing. I think we were discussing before we sat down today that there's actually an extra law degree that you can get in nothing but this.
Oh, wow.
Right. Tulane University in New Orleans, which of course is a huge shipping.
Yeah, big shipping.
Has tremendous amount of commerce there. And I think University of Miami has one as well. But that's how convoluted it is. But a little bit of, I want to step away. Well, navigable waters can include literally a 5 or 10 foot stream. But if it connects to the ocean, then you can have admiralty jurisdiction.
There's a potential case to be made.
Yes, there is. Okay. There is. So one element is navigable waters. Our second element is potential highway or waterway of commerce. Let me say that again. A potential waterway of commerce, Will. And it doesn't mean, and this is very unique, it doesn't mean that it's ever been used as a waterway of commerce, but could it potentially? So you and I, we have friends that live back in the Archers Creek area on the rivers, and you know how many tributaries and rivers, big rivers, smaller rivers, things like that. We have a friend that owns a home there, and they just use their boat to go to get groceries. There you go.
All of a sudden, it's a commercial waterway.
Absolutely, and because it just has to be potential,
right,
not actually used for. Most of the time, you will see it used in water commerce, but it is the second linchpin there is potential. So if you've got navigable waters, and which is interpreted very broadly. And if you have a potential waterway of commerce, and then of course you have to have the accident, you have to have something that brings it in, then you can avail yourself of Admiralty law.
So this is amazing. So we've got something that goes all the way back to the ancient times of Phoenician fleet. We've got something embedded in the U.S. Constitution.
Yes, sir.
And then we've got these two conditions, and bring all this to Archers Creek for us to February 24 of 2019.
I'm glad to do that. So we've established that Archers Creek, which I believe connects Port Royal with Parris Island.
That's right.
And we've talked about our two key components. Would it be a potential waterway of commerce? Is it a navigable water? Yes, and yes.
And obviously an accident.
Correct. And unfortunately we had that terrible accident. And we know that around 40 to 50 years ago, pleasure craft, which is what the young folks were on, Admiralty law said, yes, that can apply with a pleasure craft. Originally more on cargo ships and things like that, but they did expand it. So what you've got there is this unfortunate accident happens, and a couple of things that will be considered, in my opinion, and I don't know, I haven't spoken with them, by the attorneys in terms of Admiralty, and I will be talking about the attorneys from Mallory Beach, which I believe is Mark Tinsley and Woody Gooding, is you can do something that is unusual. You can bring an action against just the boat itself.
Oh, wow.
Okay, right. Now, to kind of expand on that a little bit.
Fishing boat.
To kind of expand on that a little bit, if I'm going down the road and I'm speeding and I hit you from behind and unfortunately you have severe injuries, you do not sue my car.
The car, right.
You sue me, and you may sue who I'm working for, okay? But you don't sue the car. In Admiralty, you can bring the action against the boat itself, which would primarily be to reach the marine insurance policy, okay? The boat itself, the operator or the driver, which in this case would have been Paul had he been living, and the owner. So you've got one more. Murdaugh. You've got one more level than you would have with an accident case on the road or with a truck or something like that. And so the different actions you see, but in this case, I mean, I believe that it's alleged that Paul was driving around 30 or 35 miles an hour, hits the pilings on the bridge.
That's correct.
That boat's not going to be worth very much. Right. I mean, so that's really more designed for,
a claim there would be fruitless.
Somebody might give you $2,500 for it. I don't know. Right. But it's going to be in pretty bad shape after that wreck, I would imagine. I haven't seen pictures of it, but I would imagine. So that is really more designed, Will, for big cargo type ships that are worth 80, 90 million or whatever they're worth. So you could bring that action. But going back to Archers Creek, mainly, I think you would see under Admiralty, you would see the action against Paul Murdaugh's estate. And I don't know if he had property in his name. I don't know if he owned tracts of land. I don't know if he had stock accounts. I don't know if he had what his financial assets were worth, but you would see an action potentially against his estate. You could see, and I know we touched on this last time for our audience, but you would see probably a negligent entrustment action. And I want to talk about that for a second. Yeah. That would be an action, I believe Ellick owned the boat.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct. And by the way, that is exactly how you say it. We've got a lot of people following this story trying to say this man's name. That is exactly how you say it.
Yeah, that Ellick owned the boat. And so the question then becomes an action called negligent entrustment, Will, which is kind of rare, but it's out there. And that was the owner of the boat, in this case, in this situation, be Ellick, on notice that Paul should not have been driving the boat. Right. Now, that is a fact-based inquiry, okay? So let's talk about what that would be.
Sure.
That would be, did Ellick ever get a phone call from a friend whose child was out in the boat with Paul a year earlier, 6 months earlier, and said, listen, we're all friends here, but Paul's driving that boat at 40 miles an hour, and I don't want to hurt our friendship, but I thought it was kind of dangerous.
Was he notified before that there was potential for this kind of
notified
action?
Before. Right. I mean, did he have anything? Did he have a DUI? or a BUI? Did he have complaints? Were there other people
or knowledge of potential
correct
substance abuse?
Absolutely. Are there enough people? And this is a fact-based inquiry. Would there be enough people with things that you just mentioned to come forward where a judge would allow a jury, charge them, which is just instructions, charge them on what negligent entrustment is, and allow a verdict against Ellick, basically saying you should have never let him drive that boat.
Should have never been behind.
Right. He should never have been behind the wheel. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if those facts are out there. I'm sure that the attorneys in the case would have a lot of knowledge about that. But you would see the negligent entrustment action. I know that we've discussed before. We've talked a little bit about a dram shop action, which is improper selling of alcohol. We know that we have Parker's convenience store, where the video shows a fairly, I don't want to say large, but a pretty substantial alcohol purchase with a false identification. I think that's been established, that earlier that afternoon, I want to say. And then we have the video, the second component there, the second entity there, to my knowledge, would be Luther's Bar and Grill, I believe, in Beaufort.
That's correct.
And I know I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it a lot of times, and I know our audience has. The camera with them coming out, they're having trouble ambulating, they're having trouble walking, a lot of swaying and things like that. So you would look at an action against Luther's. Now, our proof there would be, were they overserved? Was Paul overserved? And that would be, they were with the group. They met 10 other people. And we've interviewed all 10 people, and they said they never should have continued to serve him. So that would be the dram shop action part of it. But in terms of Admiralty, to try to clean that up a little bit, an Admiralty claim is exclusive federal jurisdiction if you're bringing the action purely against the boat itself. You could not bring an action in state court, against the boat itself. Not to lead our audience all over the place, but we've also established that the boat's probably not worth very much. Right. But in federal court, it is a bench trial. Now, this is an important point for our audience, meaning there is no jury. The judge makes the decision.
Solely the judge makes
yes, it is the judge makes the decision, in federal court on Admiralty claims. In state court, you certainly could opt for a bench trial. Very, very rare. The real reason you go there is because you want a jury of 12 people. Okay? And the attorneys have to decide if they're going to invoke Admiralty jurisdiction, do I just want a judge to hear it? Okay? Right. Or no, are there reasons that I think it favors us if 12 people hear it? And that would generally be a motion. Frankly, from what I've seen in this case, I don't know if it would matter.
Now, there, and again, we've got two big personalities, and we've got Mark Tinsley representing the Beach family.
Excellent attorney.
And then we've got Greg Parker.
Yes.
Who is, readers are aware, he's shifting up his legal team a bit, hiring some new guns for certainly the Vicky Ward case. But as we look at these two personalities, don't they have an obligation? Is there a mediation requirement here?
There is, and I'm glad you brought that up. Mediation is, the big term is called alternative dispute resolution, and I'd like to expand on that a little bit if you feel like we have time.
Sure.
Alternative dispute resolution means you're going to take the action, the complaint, the lawsuit itself, into a different forum than a court. Okay. There are two ways you can go about that, Will. There's mediation and there's arbitration, and those terms are confused all the time by people. I want to explain this a little bit. Arbitration is simply a private judge. It can be a private panel of judges, and all you're really doing, and, the courts have been basically shut down until the last month or so for 2 years because of COVID. Tremendous backlog.
Oh, wow.
And if the parties want to get a case resolved and say, listen, we want this resolved, we want to do this, they can schedule it on their own time. They hire generally prominent attorneys, and they come in and they hear the case and
That
they make a
hasn't happened
decision.
in this case.
No, it is not.
Okay.
Mediation has happened. So just to clean up a little bit on arbitration, it is a private judge, or sometimes you see a panel of 3, and they decide the case, and both the plaintiff and the defendant, the attorneys, there's a lot of paperwork, and they say, this is the way we're going to do it, and we're both going to live by it, and that's just what we want to do.
Do they have to agree to that beforehand?
Yes, they do. Now, let's talk about mediation a second. Mediation is basically a settlement conference, okay? And mediation is required in South Carolina for every filed civil case. Why? Because of the backlog, and because they want to get people together to see if it can be resolved. Our court time is very valuable. I think it's been reported that we have amongst the lowest number of judges per capita than any other state, or certainly toward the bottom. Court time is very valuable. The judges will, in our state, circuit judges, hear both civil and criminal cases. In Texas, just to give you an example, they have judges that hear nothing but criminal, and judges that hear nothing but civil. So we've got judges working double time here. So mediation is required. Basically, what happens there is the parties come together. The mediator is an attorney. There would be a discussion for 30 minutes to an hour about the basic issues. The plaintiffs go into one room. The defendants, which can be 1 or 3 or 6, go into various other rooms. The mediator tries to facilitate. I think that's the big word here. Will facilitate discussion. And again, a hypothetical example there would be one defendant may say, listen, we know we're liable. Okay, we're just arguing about the amount of money that we think they're due. Exactly.
Right, sure.
And you try to narrow the issues down. It is a confidential process. Now I want to talk about that a minute. Let's say that we have mediation, and it's often they have 2 or 3 mediations happen. I think on the with the Murdaugh case, I believe 1 mediation has happened that was not successful.
That's correct.
But they can have as many as they want. I mean, it is confidential. So what that means is, if the case ultimately does wind up going to court for a jury, one party can't say, well, they said they would offer $800,000 on this back in the mediation. That none of that comes in. But mediation
it would be prejudicial.
Exactly, exactly. Settlement discussions are not admissible. Okay, so it is confidential. That is very much observed, and I think you will I don't know. I think you'll probably see more mediations occur again, not only because of the complexity of the case and the attention of the case, but also just because of the tremendous backlog that we're experiencing right now.
Now, a lot of folks have looked at the Maritime Admiralty invocation by Parker as kind of a gamble. Do you see it that way, or do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you look at the factors. Will is of course you're thinking about what's best for my client to do.
Sure. And
again, a driving force there, is it a bench trial? Is it a jury trial? What do I think would be best? The linchpin of that decision would probably be, even if I'm being hypothetical here.
Sure, absolutely.
Even if my client is a jerk and behaved really badly, he's still only, a judge can put that out of their mind and say, I'm deciding this on the law. Right. And he may be a bad character, bad apple, bad person. That doesn't matter to me. But a jury is going to sense that a lot more. Right. Okay. So the biggest thing with Admiralty is that I see, and again, I don't specialize in this area, and I do want to talk about the people that have helped as we conclude our visit today, is that it's a bench trial and state court. If an Admiralty claim can be brought in state court, Will, and the judge has to take the federal law, statutes, case law, precedents. Again, we're talking all the way back to Hammurabi, and they have to apply that even though it is in state court. And so the biggest issue there, again, if I can just expand on that a second.
Yeah, sure.
Federal court does not have near the docket backlog that state court does. So the attorneys and the parties are going to get a lot more notice. We're going to start this case on July 19th at 9:30 a.m. State court generally does not work that way.
Right.
State court, you go to court on Monday, and this unfortunately has happened to me several times. You go in there, you're number 86 on the docket, and then by the end of the docket meeting, you're number 40, and then by Wednesday, you're number 3, and now you got to bring everybody in there and be ready to go, and the judge is saying, I'm ready to go. We want to try this case in 2 days. So for convenience, not only arbitration, but federal court is a much more steady calendar, so to speak.
And I'm not asking you to say you're the judge. I'm not going to try to put you on the spot that hard. But as you look at the facts of this case, and again, I'm kind of just sitting here thinking in my head, okay, we've got a navigable.
We do.
That's obvious. Commerce, I'm sure that there's potential commercial activity there. If there's an outright, I'm sure you mentioned earlier somebody probably run a shrimp boat through there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's all it takes.
May have even been one of those Murdaugh shrimp boats we keep hearing about. I'm kidding. But as we think about those factors, as you look at the potential nexus here for a judge to get involved, maybe pluck this case and say, yeah, I do see these issues. I mean, has he got an argument here?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly think it would be up to each individual plaintiff as to how they want to proceed on it. But certainly Admiralty, I want to talk a little bit about the criminal side of Admiralty if I can too. And I hope I'm following you and what you're asking and, expanding where it needs to be. Admiralty law is 99% civil. And I know we talked about the Mediterranean. I know we talked about the shipping from Europe. It is primarily a vehicle for civil compensation in shipping accidents. That's where it all started. On the criminal, so let's take that to Archer's Creek. We do have a navigable water. We do have a potential waterway of commerce. It is very plaintiff friendly, and I know the lawyers will be considering this. And the facts are the facts now. And I've not seen any of the discovery. And for our audience, the discovery is the case file, the depositions, the video investigative, footage, the video. It's everything that's evidence in the case.
Investigative files.
Everything has to be swapped. Okay. There's very few exceptions, but everything has to be swapped except something called, attorney work product or attorney-client privilege. But 99% of the stuff is swapped. I haven't seen any of that. Not going to see it. But there just doesn't seem to be, the defendants have a pretty high mountain to climb here. Right. When you look at the facts, because again, the boat's going, the 17, 18-foot boat being driven, operated by Paul, I think using handheld flashlights, 35 miles an hour. This is going to be, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is, answer your question. I don't think it matters who decides it. I don't think it would turn out well for the Murdaughs. Just based on what I've seen, I don't know. But the big linchpin there again is it federal in terms of, and I want to make another point too.
Yeah, please.
Is it federal with a bench trial only? Or would it be better to go into state court where there's a jury? And that would be the primary consideration. Now, another factor is that of the potential, if you file it in state court, okay, it can be removed to federal court on a motion from the defendant, if there is diversity, okay? So if the boat was manufactured somewhere other than South Carolina potentially, then they may say, no, we're going to federal court. Okay, we're not,
So just that one little thing,
right?
Could be
just that one
to,
vehicle.
Wow.
Well, we're going to go to federal court. That's to the best of my knowledge. I wanted to touch on the criminal penalties too, because there has been, I think, a lot of speculation and wonder about where is the federal enforcement regarding.
Violations of this constitutional
regarding that, regarding Ellick's unfortunate situation. Where's the FBI? Where is all that here? In terms strictly of Admiralty, there is one code that I did look up that says that the maximum for a criminal prosecution is $1,000 fine and or up to 2 years of imprisonment. Okay. Now there can be substantial civil penalties, but that has, that's not anywhere near the ballpark of a felony BUI, which is 1 to 25, and reckless homicide, which is 0 to 10. So that, and the fact that DNR That's Department of Natural Resources. DNR, as we've seen from those videos, that was the investigating agency. So that's probably, as it relates to that crash, Will, and I'm not talking about other allegations against Ellick that have surfaced later, that would be why that you generally, the U.S. Attorney's Office, our federal prosecution force, would not give serious consideration, I believe. You know, out of deference to, you know, their counterparts.
He's looking at a bit more time than that,
right,
on the state side.
If he was alive, he would be.
More than likely, well, we're talking about Alec.
Yeah, I'm sorry, talking about Alec. Yes, forgive me.
Likely looking at additional time here in the not too distant future. It's fascinating how all this weaves together, isn't it?
I tell you what, it's just a complex case. I mean, it really is. I mean, you've got so many factors as we kind of step back and just look at it. Will, you've got the criminal, and I'm talking purely about, forgive me, I'm talking purely about the boat crash.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a significant criminal prosecution against, when Paul was alive, against a prominent family. You've got a potential prosecution against Ellick, I guess conceivably. That's just on the criminal side. I know there were some allegations about a hospital visit and some things along that line.
Alleged obstruction of justice
right.
in the aftermath.
You know, I know that's been mentioned. So you got that on the criminal side. We've talked about the dram shop action against Parker's for the sale of the alcohol that was on video. We've talked about Luther's, the dram shop for over-serving. We've talked about Paul driving. We've talked about a potential action against Ellick for negligent entrustment. I mean, there are a lot of irons in the fire here. And
it's significant because readers, viewers, listeners know that this boat crash is what really launched this story on certainly on the statewide stage, as far as people knowing who the Murdaughs are.
Right.
And there was a lot of attention when the charges were filed against Paul. A lot of folks did not expect the Office of the Attorney General to come out and charge hard and heavy, but they did.
They did. They went full force.
They did. Megan Burstead, don't mess with her. I don't mess with her. Tell us a little bit, though. You and by the way, this is just wonderful. The history, the legal context. But you're a gracious guy. You like to share the love, and you said you had some help.
I did, and I would like to mention the folks that helped me. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Rob Mosley and Kurt Rozelski are very accomplished transportation lawyers in Greenville, and while they don't do a tremendous amount of admiralty, they are involved in transportation. They were kind enough to talk with me. Joseph Rowe, he also practices in Greenville. Will, he's an international trade lawyer.
Oh, cool.
So a certified and designated customs broker. He does a lot of this, and he and I spent a lot of time together after I made my initial outline, after talking to Rob and Kurt, and really helped me with the fine points. And excuse me, Bill Lyles also gave me a lot of time and direction on the alternative dispute resolution process. Bill is a mediator. I've been doing it for 20 years. All of these lawyers have excellent reputations. And he talked about ADR, again, the alternative dispute resolution, and really ironed out the differences or polished them up for me, since I'm mainly in criminal court, of arbitration and mediation. So I want to thank those guys. And I want to thank you for your time.
Oh, no, absolutely. And we're going to put each one of those lawyers in the show notes along with Steve. But this is just great context because, again, it's such a key moment in this bigger case.
Yeah.
And it's so misunderstood. People don't know all the details, and just wonderful context. You were so knowledgeable on the BUI stuff the last time, and this new component,
mighty kind.
going deeper on it. I love it, man. This is the kind of stuff I love. This stuff. I'm a history major, so that part of it appeals to me.
I love history,
but also just trying to get to the bottom of where this case could go, because again, this is an issue for those of you following it. The civil case, this is still hanging over the Mallory Beach civil case. In fact, it's one of the bigger issues hanging over the case.
It is. And it's like, I tell you, it's like an example. It's just like putting Quicksilver on one of these desks over here. You just don't know which way it's going to go, how it's going to end. I think, not to continue our discussion, but I think Ellick's assets have been frozen.
Yeah, there's a court-appointed receiver.
Right. There's a receiver going through that. So if a judgment is rendered against Ellick on the civil side, I mean, will you see a marshal sale? Will you see? I think the the property in Colleton or in Islandton, which is part of Colleton County. I think it's like 1,800 acres. I'm sure it's a beautiful
Big,
place.
yeah. Currently
Is
for
that?
sale.
Yeah, I mean, is that going to be attached?
You're going to buy it? What is it? 3.4 million, I think, or something like that.
No,
A little out of my
I don't think
price.
I've seen that much money in my life. I don't. Most less have it, but yeah. So you got that. You've got assets. You've got stock accounts. Conceivably,
Yeah.
you got stock accounts. You've got anything where there may be $2,500 shotguns that are there. I mean, I know a lot of hunting took place. I believe a lot of hunting. You know, there's all kind of. There's just a lot of different ways it can go. It is fascinating, and as you mentioned, Will, the boat crash drew a lot of statewide attention. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then when the terrible tragedy occurred of Maggie and Paul's death, slaying, then it became more regional and national.
Absolutely.
And then with some other allegations that have been made, it's frankly somewhat international at this point.
Yeah,
So
it's one of the bigger
stories.
stories.
It is fascinating. But y'all have done a wonderful job of following it, and congratulations on the success that FITSNews has had.
Well, thank you. We're trying, and it's folks like you keeping us alert, aware of everything that's happening in this just rich context here. Steve, thank you for coming in. Steve Sumner, everybody, Sumner and Todd Law Firm, based out of Greenville, South Carolina, upstatedui.com. If for any of your needs on that front, hopefully I'll stay out of trouble on that front. But also some good news today, the key takeaway. I know a lot of our audience, hunters and fishers.
Yes.
So if you're drinking a beer on a boat in Lake Murray, you're good to go. No Admiralty law coming after you.
But DNR and a BUI is a different story.
That's true. But Steve, thank you for this wonderful context for coming on. We appreciate it as always, man.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.